Hola a todos los desviados textuales y bienvenidos a otro episodio de Texting. Yo soy Tom Quixote in St. Petersburg.
And I'm Mark Will in Taipei. Totally unprepared for this episode. Let's see what happens.
We're just texting, people. Alright. So, we're talking about the seminal novel Don Quixote. This is season 3, episode 16. Don Quixote has been my most recent literary challenge. Took me approximately 6 months reading on and off, and I guess it was the most significant undertaking of a literary nature since Proust for me, in terms of just sticking with a really...
That's been a while.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been reading. I'm just saying a book that kind of required grit, and has a really important place in the literary pantheon.
But you've read quite a few Russian classics in the interim.
Yeah, that's true. So basically what I've just said is false.
Glad I was able to correct you. So you read both parts 1 and 2.
Yep.
And it took you about 6 months. How many pages altogether?
It's around 800. And
that sounds about right. I was going to say 1,000, but yeah.
Yeah, amusingly, I did a decent amount of the reading in England, and I think I told you this, but I ended up cutting the book in half physically because I didn't want to carry so much. So I was traveling with the second part. Then I ended up losing the second part of the initial translation I had, which was by Tom something. I can look it up. So I then bought another edition at a British charity shop, also cut that one in half. And so now when I came back to Russia, I've got 2 halves from different translators, and
yeah,
I should have brought them with me into the room, but
that's all right.
Sacrilegious, I'm sure, in many ways, but yeah, we're going to talk about it. You haven't read it for approximately 30 years, is that correct?
Maybe not quite 30, but close to that. I remember when I did read it, it was like the year that my first son was born, so that's like 27 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
What
and
prompted you to read it, and what memories do you have of it?
I mean, it's just, you got to read it, right? Like, it's canonical.
Sure, but still, it came up at some particular point. So, like, do you know at that moment why you said, okay, it's time to read this book?
It had always been on my list, and I just hadn't gotten around to it. So it's like, okay, I don't know, maybe I found a good translation at like a half-price books at that time. That was before I would like order stuff from Amazon or whatever, you know.
Right.
Like I would go to the half-price books in Houston and look and see what they had. I do know that it was a used book, so that's probably where I got it. I didn't like go to the Barnes and Noble and buy the $25 the latest translation for $25. Yeah, it was and you know, actually I'm not sure I read part 2. I'm ashamed to say, but I think maybe I did. But anyway, we can get into that. Okay, we can get into that. Next slide.
Sure. Well, let me give the listener a 1-paragraph summary, because I know some people listen to our show just to hear our erudite conversations. And as one student at my school once said, I may have quoted her before, but I don't like reading books, but I like discussing them. It's one of our students at our esteemed Cambridge International School. So, have no shame, listener, if you haven't read it, but you've probably heard of it, at least, and the very basic plot revolves around the adventures of a member of the lowest nobility, an hidalgo from La Mancha named Alonso Quijano, who reads so many chivalric romances that he loses his mind and decides to become a knight errant to revive chivalry and serve his nation under the name Don Quixote de la Mancha. He recruits as his squire a simple farm laborer, Sancho Panza, who brings a unique, earthy wit to Don Quixote's lofty rhetoric. Okay, so Cervantes himself had a very dramatic and storied life, and this is actually one section of the slideshow that I think, you may know more about Cervantes' biography than me. I have a very scant understanding. What do you know? I mean, you could use my little prompts there.
Well, one of those I provided. That's a photo of a statue in Sevilla that I remember seeing outside the. I think it's called Entre Carceles, between the jails. So it's like an area around a prison, and he was actually locked up there. I think he was he spent the most time in captivity in Algiers. He was like captured by pirates and
Right.
I don't know, enslaved or something, or jailed there. But he was also jailed
He was
in
ransomed.
his. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
but he was also imprisoned in his native land, and it was in Sevilla. So when I was in Sevilla, how many years ago? Not quite 10, maybe 7 or 8 now. I remember seeing that and saying, it's the man himself.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, he lost the use of his left arm, as you mentioned, in the Battle of Lepanto, and that's when he was then apprehended by the Moors. And he developed a pretty strong familiarity with Moorish culture, not only in Spain, but obviously in his time in Algiers. And we'll come to this later, but he then ends up crediting a Moorish historian with providing the true story for Don Quixote. So it's kind of an interesting meta tool that comes up later on.
Well, anyone that's been to Spain or Portugal, Iberia, can immediately see the immense, deep cultural influence of the Moors.
100%.
Like in everything, in language, architecture,
Alhambra,
literature. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The date of his death is interesting because that is also the year that another famous author, but in the English language, died. And I just looked it up. Actually, Cervantes died one day before William Shakespeare. Did you know that?
I think Bloom has even. I knew that it was very close, and I think Bloom may even have merged those two dates somehow. But yeah,
Harold Bloom.
Yes, and for Bloom, these two are like on a different level of the literary canon. Like they are the top two, and then on the second tier, you might throw other writers like Dante, Milton, and his tier list, as those are quite trendy right now. But yeah, for him, nobody else can fuck with Shakespeare or Quixote or Cervantes. So interesting.
But that is a crazy coincidence, right? Like, what was it? Was there something about that time? It's the Elizabethan age in England, and I guess it's the age of declining empire. I mean, it's still kind of the golden age of Spain, I guess, but hadn't the British
I think it's very
already
much in
defeated
decline.
the British had already defeated the Spanish Armada. Okay, yeah, but it's still like the golden age of
Still a force,
literature,
sure. Yeah.
and still the golden age of literature, right?
Hmm.
With Cervantes, but yeah, that's a pretty crazy coincidence.
And Cervantes very much wanted to be a playwright. You know, he wrote more than 20 plays. He just didn't find much success in that realm. But yeah, he was also trying to work in theater.
Mm.
I wonder to what extent we would say that they share stylistic similarities. I mean, I guess you could say they both have that kind of earthy side of like humor that can be very toilet, or you know, they're not afraid to be vulgar.
Mm.
Um a lot of like kind of fart jokes, and yeah, I mean, I was just surprised sometimes when I was reading. The examples are not coming to mind
Mm.
massively, but yeah, so they are both able to kind of dip into that. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, obviously he's not
Well,
writing in verse in
yeah.
this.
Well, I was just thinking of another contemporary, or he's roughly contemporaneous with them. We've talked about him before, Montaigne, in the Francophonic world, right? Roughly the
The
same
essayists,
time.
yeah.
Roughly the same time. And I think many scholars believe Shakespeare drew upon, I think in particular, the Montaigne's essay on cannibalism when he was writing what, maybe the Tempest. Anyway, three titanic literary figures of the same basic time frame. All right, so what are we looking at here?
So the two sections, the two volumes of Don Quixote were written 10 years apart. We can actually see here that it says segunda parte on the second part. So
Mm-hmm.
Quixote, or sorry, Quixote. Cervantes, I think, had plans for a sequel, but I'm not sure how explicitly that's stated. But the big story, and I'm sure you know this, is that it was so massively popular when the first edition came out that basically some fan fiction came out from a writer that continued the story, and this absolutely infuriated Cervantes, and so he kind of felt compelled not only to more quickly add to the story, but also to kill off Quixote at the end and declare vehemently that any other accounts of Quixote moving on are completely fictitious and pernicious and defamatory. And also, he takes many occasions within the second part to just diss the other version, and it becomes so meta that the character Quixote hears about this other edition that's come out, and he openly refutes it within the story,
Mm.
because part of the second part is that Quixote's become famous because so many people have heard about his adventures, and it kind of legitimizes him in a way. So it's not that all of the stories that was out there was false. Like the section that Cervantes wrote is like all good, but then Quixote himself, yeah, becomes aware that there are like these um, divergent narratives coming out, and yeah, so Cervantes never misses a chance to attack this pirate version. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
knew all that, but yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I had heard about that. Now, the Spanish title, I can't see it clearly. El Ingenioso Hidalgo
Hidalgo
Don Quixote de
de
la
la
Mancha.
Mancha. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the ingenious Hidalgo, Don Quixote of La Mancha.
Yes, sir.
Anything you want to say about that?
A couple notes people might be interested in, like Hidalgo is like the lowest rank of noble, so it just kind
Mm-hmm.
of places him firmly in this bourgeois but not particularly decorated
Mm-hmm.
status. And we'll talk about La Mancha on a subsequent slide.
Okay. Let's move on then. Alonso Quijano.
Yeah, so this is Don Quixote in a more human form. So we see this man enraptured in a book, and perhaps because of his kind of lowly social status in comparison to maybe some of the characters he's reading about, for example, or the previous glories of the Spanish Empire, I don't think he necessarily even had that much to do. And I think that's a social criticism that Cervantes is putting out there. So he ends up finding meaning through these novels that he's reading, these chivalric romances, which were kind of declining at this time in popularity, but had definitely seized the imaginations of the Spanish public for the previous couple centuries. And yeah, he gets hypnotized by them until one day yeah, as we've said before, he gets up and gallantly announces that he's the next coming of the chivalric tradition.
Well, I like the parallelism. Quijano, Quixote. It
Mm.
reminds me of Bolaño Bellano in
Yes,
the
yes.
Savage Detectives. And I might add, it reminds me of
Jaffe Ryder?
Martin Martin Wells, Mark Will,
Okay,
J.G. Vara, G.J. Villa,
okay.
authors of the Aranesque series of novelettes, which are still being composed. But the Quixote Sancho um, theme is very prevalent in this series, just so readers know.
Nice, nice.
But
Very
yeah,
good.
Jaffe Ryder, uh, Gary Snyder, and who was the other? We're talking about
Yeah, Ginsberg
Dharma
had something
bums.
like I can't remember, but it's something similar. He's got a
Yeah.
funny.
But what was the other Dharma bum
That's what I
besides
mean. Like,
Jaffe Ryder?
I know that Ginsberg had a pseudonym, which was I can't remember it off the top of my head, but Alva Goldbook.
Yeah. But what about the Kerouac character?
Ah, I'm not sure, bro. I don't have it on me.
Okay. Show notes.
Ray Smith,
That
I
doesn't
think,
sound
is
right.
the main character. Yeah, it features
Okay.
Smith, Ryder, and Henry Morley, based on real life friend John Montgomery.
All right.
So, yeah.
Anyway, Jaffe Ryder is a more obvious parallel. Moving on, there's Don Quixote himself.
Yeah, he's taking a
Looks
selfie
like he's
here.
taking a selfie. Yeah.
Um, but it is remarkable the wealth of artistic interpretations. I know you've included some Dali representations, which we'll be showing later on in the presentation. But
Yeah.
yeah, as I was researching for the show, I mean, there was a website I found which is dedicated exclusively to the various representations from different artists, and I guess the most iconic one is that Picasso one, which has kind of become almost like a brand, like a brand logo.
Do we have that in the slides?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, but
I'll put
you
that
know
in
which
the
one I'm talking
post.
about, I guess, right?
I'm not sure I do,
Okay.
but
Well, yeah.
we'll find that and put it in the post. I mean, yeah, just thinking about all these artistic representations. I mean, they're Quixote is kind of like Hamlet, you know, he's like an archetype. There's really no other character quite like him. You know, he's like a whole new species of person, right? The Quixote type, the Hamlet type.
Hmm. Yes.
It's an archetypal personality.
And we'll get
So
into that in a second too with our definition of quixotic.
quixotic. Yeah,
Quixotic.
yeah,
That's why I need you on that one. I just sent you the picture, by the way, on WhatsApp. Can you glance at it for 2 seconds if you have your
yeah.
phone
Let me
handy?
see.
Just because that
We're
image is
we're
obviously like
literally
so.
texting on texting.
Yo. But yeah, you know that picture, right?
Um. Oh,
I mean,
okay. Yeah, yeah. I've seen that. That's a
that's
Picasso,
got to
huh?
be the most.
Hmm.
It's got to be the most iconic image, I think.
Okay. Yeah, nice one. Um. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to say about that. So let's move to the horse, Rocinante. A
Yeah.
reversal.
So yeah, that was part of the etymology. When I was reading, I think there's some kind of language connection between Rocinante and like a play on reversal, and I guess that being the idea that initially Rosin means nag or low quality horse, and ante could mean like before.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
so the idea is, yeah, that maybe this rather humble horse then becomes like this glorious steed. Um, yeah. So
Footnote
Rocinante, yeah,
for,
go on.
well, some literary trivia in this footnote. John Steinbeck, as he wrote Travels with Charlie, which is a nonfiction book about just before his death, he wanted to travel the states one last time and write about it. So he took his poodle Charlie with him in, I guess it was like a Winnebago or a camper or something, you know. And he called his camper Rocinante. So
Oh, nice.
he was on a quixotic quest of sorts himself, as
Nice.
he traveled the states and wrote about his experiences. Um, I actually read that book maybe around the same time that I read Don Quixote. So that was some interesting intertextuality at that time.
Very good.
And then we've got the incomparable Dulcinea del Toboso. And here is a Dali representation, which is really strange. She almost seems to be bearded. Um, what does that say about her? And that this other, I don't know who the artist of this other picture is, but also not a very flattering portrait of her. She's a bit heavy set and not that fair of feature.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the obvious joke that the reader knows and recognizes that, and that Sancho also comes to quickly learn. You know, when he kind of spies her, I think she's doing some kind of cleaning or dealing with some thrush. I don't know. One weird thing is, I was watching some lecture, and the lecturer said something like, "Oh yeah, she's to us, we know she's a prostitute," and I was like, "What?" I never came across that, and I still haven't found any reference to that. So it's just weird that this guy said it like it was so obvious.
Hmm.
Um, Another account I've heard, and again, I'm sure this is actually just stated somewhere, but I am just texting. Okay, so she was a slaughterhouse worker with a famed hand for salting pork. Um,
Hmm.
but
Salt that pork.
yes, uh, there's one scene, where Sancho kind of gets out of hot water. He's supposed to have tracked her down for one of Don Quixote's missions, because Don Quixote is always like kind of ashamed or scared to confront her personally. And it's also like maybe, and he like justifies that, I think, by, this is always supposed to be like a very pure love that Quixote has. Like it shouldn't even be tainted by sexuality. But so my point is that Sancho Panza just sees some peasant woman riding by, and he says, "Oh, that's her," but she's not attractive, and so the story then quickly becomes, "Oh, it's enchanters who have turned Dulcinea and like trapped her in this like more coarse peasant body." So
Hmm.
then it becomes a huge mission for Don Quixote to return her to her previous form, and that's like uh one of his major missions, and it becomes the
Right.
reason that Panza's supposed to whip himself 3,000 times in order to make this thing happen, which is another just like major episode in the second section.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking of Dante and Beatrice. Like he Dante makes her the feminine ideal, the perfect woman, the symbol of purity and virtue and feminine beauty. But I think he saw her like one time in his life. I mean, she
Mm,
was a real person, but he just idealized her. He knew nothing about her. Of course, he never banged her
right.
or had any kind of contact with her. It's just like,
Like banged her against the wall.
yeah, not that either.
Yeah, but as you said, it was like within the first week, I think, that the Quixote character's formed. He's got to like get all these archetypes fulfilled, right? So he's got to get the sword, he's got to get the lady, and soon after that, he needs his squire.
Right.
So yeah,
A Shakespearean uh, comic parallel might be Falstaff. I just thought about that. Not so much for the chivalry, but just the, I don't know, the absurd disconnect between reality and illusion,
mm,
and the comic potentialities of that. I don't know what I'm talking about.
it sounds good.
There's Sancho. Yeah, so let's go with that. That sounds good. There's Sancho.
Yes, so the
What a
sidekick,
fatty.
he does enjoy a
Wait, I
mead.
thought it was Pancho.
That was just to rile up our fans
Okay.
or critics. But yeah, Sancho is characteristic for his Sanchismos, which I just saw them dubbed this afternoon. But basically, his language is kind of diarrhea like, and it's just diarrhea with peppered, with peppers. And the peppered, I
Hot
don't know where I'm
chili
going either.
peppers in the blistering sun.
Exactly. No, but basically, he speaks a very funny language that's just full of like country idioms,
Hmm.
some of which seem wise and some of which seem ridiculous. And
Like the idiot abroad in the Ricky
the
Gervais
Pilkington,
series.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and Sancho Panza, yeah, again, he's supposed to kind of play the fool, but he can often be like the wise fool, right? And in fact, when he does, for a short while, take over this governorship of an insula, to me and probably to many readers, he's actually like a very ideal ruler who kind of makes very rational decisions about how to deal with each kind of quandary. So in some way, he gets a bad rap, is the point, I would say. But he's obviously like the source of a lot of the comic relief. Um, he does stand up for himself sometimes as well. So on the one hand, he's this squire who, you know, is very much subservient to Don Quixote, but there were a couple of times where he once even pushed Quixote to the ground when it seemed like Quixote wanted him to do something that would like hurt him. I can't remember the exact reason he did that, but yeah, he's happy with his role until it actually like affects his material well-being. So in a way it's kind of cool that he has that ability to like stand up for himself at times. Um but this is a character who I'm sure would read very differently in the Spanish, just because you'd be getting this huge parade of idioms that maybe they
Yeah,
would be idioms that were used. I don't know, but maybe they would be like idioms that he's fouled up. Sorry,
right. Well, what's Gervais' sidekick's name? You said it.
Carl
Pilkington?
Pilkington.
Carl Pilkington.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I remember Gervais saying that Carl Pilkington once asked him on what did Jesus celebrate on December 25th? Christmas or his birthday?
Am I supposed to answer?
No, that's the joke. Like
Oh, okay.
he genuinely didn't know. Like, oh, what is it? So on December 25th,
This is
what
Pilkington who
did
asked
Jesus?
this.
Yeah,
Okay.
Gervais was reporting it like he was genuinely
Right. Okay,
perplexed. He's
right.
like, wait, on December 25th, did Jesus celebrate Christmas or his
Mm-hmm.
birthday? Come on, that's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
All right.
When I'm texting, bro, I'm just in my like. I'm not relaxed enough to laugh at things.
Oh
I'm just
God.
dialed in,
All right.
plugged in.
Maybe I told it wrong, but I think it makes sense, right?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about like how long I'm gonna make it before I need to take a pee break. So I'm
No.
getting very meta with our audience right now.
Okay. All right. Man
Speaking
of La
of
Mancha, which I think was a
speaking of
musical.
yeah. Yes, and also did you know that so there was this production, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. Did you follow that up at all? Do you know about this?
Are you talking about the Terry Gilliam movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I sent you the trailer.
Right. Yeah. So just I followed that up a little bit. And you could the fact that it's Terry Gilliam, who's responsible for Monty Python, it feels very kind of consistent in a way that he would like this kind of ridiculous, over the top Quixote historical vibe. Doesn't it seem
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't see it though, did you?
No. It's Jonathan Pryce as Quixote. I know that,
Right.
but
And Adam Driver is in it as well.
I saw that. Hey, I guess he's the Sancho character, although he's not really fat. He's not a fatty,
Yeah.
but yeah. So what's the connection to Man of La Mancha?
Uh I think just because you mentioned it being a musical, so I was just saying like another spin-off.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I didn't see it. I remember when it was being made, and I wanted to see it, but I could never find it. And
Yeah.
I think it's a French production, um, so I don't. But it's in English, so I don't know. Like the trailer had French um, title card, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know. But let's talk about. We see a map here, and I guess the red is La Mancha.
Yeah, this is the region, and So the red is the location of the natural region of La Mancha, and kind of the gray that's a bit outside is the present day region, which is called Castilla-La Mancha. And yeah, we see some windmills, like the type that we'll be discussing momentarily. But I think what speaks to me about La Mancha, or the land without water, and again we see that Arabic connection with Al Mancha,
Mm-hmm.
is just that I feel like this is a part of Spain that would be more rural and more humble, and again it kind of fits Quixote's characters. He's not coming from some kind of like, he's not coming from Imperial Madrid or something. This is a guy who's kind of out in the countryside, and yeah.
Right. I'm trying to visualize where this is. I mean, it's not Andalusia, is it?
It's north of there. Yeah, it's definitely north of
Yeah.
Andalusia.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Chivalric romance.
Yeah, so we're kind of on the tip of getting into some really hardcore dialectics, which the listener can start whetting their appetite for. But
Start
the
rearing at the bit.
start don't confuse me, because I
Okay.
still don't feel like I have a strong grip. So can you
When you say
clarify again
wedding, do you mean
WH
WETTING or
WH?
WHETTING? Okay.
Do you want to take like a 30-second language break to break down all this stuff?
No, we're already more than half an hour in, so let's keep it moving.
All right. So the huge dominant theme of the book is that this is lambasting, satirizing, parodying. We're going to get into all these words in a second. These chivalric romances, which it seems that Cervantes finds destructive to the moral sensibilities of his age. They're deluding people from looking rationally at the world around them. And he probably finds them very tiresome from a stylistic perspective as well. So I don't know if
But
you want to go
yeah,
on.
I have something to say. All parody is also a kind of homage. I mean, we should keep that in mind, right? Like,
I don't think that's indisputable.
on some level, I think it is, but maybe the degree to which his take on chivalric romance can be construed as homage is
Well, I mean, like if I
debatable.
start doing like a Trump impression right now, does that mean I'm a fan, or that I'm like that's an homage to Trump? I mean, we
Yeah,
can.
I see what you mean, but
I get your point too.
yeah, yeah. Okay, we traded points.
Okay.
Let's
I mean,
carry
so I guess
on.
I would just say that, I mean, are you at all familiar with this genre? I know a lot of people would tie this in with like a King Arthur.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, can you add anything to that genre, like to help the reader understand maybe what encompasses this genre? The listener, I should say.
I mean, it goes back to the troubadours, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, this has probably some Moorish influence. Like the troubadours were traveling singers, and they were playing lutes, stringed instruments. I mean, the guitar comes from Spain, right? Like that's
La
probably,
guitarra.
yeah, it's probably it probably has its origin in some Moorish stringed instrument. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the idealization of the female, that's an important part of the troubadours tradition. Um and you know, if we're talking about like Arthurian legend, it's like it's not the idealized female is not your wife, right? Like um Lancelot idealized Arthur's wife, not his own, you know. And there's kind of
But
an S and
idealized,
M
not
quality
not,
to it all.
but
Hmm.
idealized, not meaning longing for, right, or pining after.
Well, I mean, it's I'm sure there's got to the Freudians would certainly say there's a sexual origin to it all, but it's like sublimated, right? Like maybe they weren't consciously aware of it, but I think they probably were. It's just they transmuted it into something else. Like it's kind of there was kind of like an edging sort of dynamic at play, right? Like about edging, like you
No.
hold back. Well, you hold back as long as you can before you bust, right? So
Okay.
the lack of release is a big tension builder, and it increases the passion. So not doing it is one of the most erotic
Mm,
things imaginable, or that's sort of like the tradition uh that the troubadours represent in some ways. Like busting actually busts up the dream or the fantasy
right.
or the idealization.
Right.
um I think we talked about this before. Post coitum omni mal triste. After coitus, every animal is sad. Aw, I busted.
Did you want to promote your sexology book that's coming out soon?
Which one is that? Everything I write is sexological. So,
All right.
for example, if you purchase this book here, Earnest Games, you will find a piece called A Tale of Two Blowjobs. So go to Amazon and order your copy
Nice.
today. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
And later on, we're going to get some comments from Don Carlos de la Plana, which will bring in some other genres besides chivalric romance that are also being spurned by Cervantes, but that will come later.
Spurned. All right. Here we go. Burlesque parody
I always feel
satire.
like a little, I'm always close to sweating when I try out big words.
It's okay.
But you got to just go for it, man. Otherwise, it's like
Yeah.
you take risks. You got to take that shot.
You can it's okay to drop a few sanchismos.
Exactly. So, have you seen these pigeons before when you search for Google Images?
No.
It's like
What is
a,
that?
I don't know, but they have these for all kinds of words. Like, it's like, I don't know what brand it is, but it's like, this is like a kind of iconic image where one pigeon will be
It's
asking the
like
other
a
pigeon.
like a thesaurus website
Yeah,
or
it's like,
something.
exactly. So, yeah, just thought it'd be, do any of these words stand out for you? We're looking at an image of synonyms for burlesque, um, in terms of ways that we can define Don Quixote. Is it is this worth playing with, or should we just move on?
Well, let's just at least list what we've got here: travesty, parody, spoof, mockery, lampoon, caricature, takeoff, mock, farce, satire. Mock being a noun?
Yeah, that's interesting, but
Yeah.
maybe just as a verb.
Yeah. I mean, it is a kind of takeoff or send up of chivalric romance. It is a satire on social mores in 16th and 17th century Spain. Is Don Quixote a caricature? Maybe to some degree. I don't know.
Yeah, I
Is it
guess
a
I just wonder like
spoof?
what other I wonder what words like because obviously we add words to language to kind of capture more nuance, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what does a word like burlesque offer that another or suggest that another word might not in this little list?
Hmm.
Or farce.
Uh,
I mean, we obviously did the episode on farce um,
the Faulty
with Faulty
Towers.
Towers. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, as I'm looking at all this, I'm thinking about how Bloom considers um, Cervantes in the top tier, right? Like, I think it's been
God
pointed out.
MC.
Yeah, right. It's been pointed out that Joyce's Ulysses is fundamentally a comic rather than tragic work. Like great so-called great literature is the serious scholars sometimes seem to have a prejudice in favor of tragedy. Oh, it's tragic and serious, therefore it's more important and profound, right? Like
Mm.
a comedy is not serious. That's not deep or profound or sublime. But in fact, it can be, and it can be more profound and deep and sublime than tragedy in some ways. Maybe Don Quixote is an example of that. Certainly Joyce's Ulysses is an example of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was kind of refreshing to me because when you approach a book like Don Quixote, it's just you've got the status, and it almost feels weighty. And then when you see that it's like a series of jokes, not only obviously, but when it has that kind of what is it, Tom and what's the Blah and Hardy?
The what?
What's the Blah and Hardy? The two, like the Double and Hardy, old English joke or something and Hardy.
Laurel and Hardy?
Laurel and Hardy. Yes, this is hard, bro. I'm from the different century, so and it has that Laurel and Hardy tenor at times.
Mm-hmm.
When Sancho's being shaken up and down in a sack and so on. It's like it's funny that this book has reached that status. It's cool. Or it's similar with Proust, right? Somebody who's never encountered Proust might see it just as this like really daunting set of descriptions, and then you kind of get that it's also like a gay guy gossiping about the people at the salon.
Yeah, and we were talking about how like Swan's Way reads as a trashy romance novel.
Right, exactly. Just
Yeah.
with very elevated prose.
Yeah.
But the
I was
actual
just
subject matter can be very earthy.
Yeah, and mundane and trivial. Um I was just thinking also of Rabelais, who is a slightly older contemporary. I just looked it up. He died in 1553, so he preceded Cervantes and Shakespeare and Montaigne by a few years. I mean, there was some overlap with him and Montaigne, I guess, but he's known for his comic uh novel or novels, I guess. Um like epic comedy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he increased the stature of comic literature, I guess you could say. So maybe he's an important forerunner for Cervantes. But that kind of irreverent humor, and that it's very. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before. The Russian critic Bakhtin wrote a whole book about Rabelais and his world, and talked how talked about how everything was related to the I always forget the term he used, but the lower bodily stratum, right? Like where the genitals and the stomach and the asshole are, right? Like what that's where all the life force is, in that lower bodily stratum, not
Right.
the upper body with the mind and or even the heart, right? But it's just like the guts and the genitals and the booty hole.
Yeah,
I should be a
absolutely.
professor.
What's the I feel like there's some kind of genre as well, like in drama, that it's like, is it picaresque or something?
Oh
Or
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is Don Quixote is a picaresque. You
okay,
know, I mean, technically, I don't know if that's accurate, but you know, picaro, that's a Spanish word originally, so that um, I don't know the history of that genre, but maybe Don Quixote is the first picaresque work of literature. We should look
I
that
think
up.
I just
Show
randomly
notes.
said a word and it worked, but that's not even I think the word that I'm looking for. I'm thinking of some kind of maybe Italian drama form where they have all these different archetypes. Does that sound
Oh,
familiar?
Commedia
Yes, comedic.
dell'arte.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah. Okay,
listeners,
the
we're gonna
picaresque.
take
Listen,
a
listen,
go
listen.
on, go
No, no,
on.
no. That's, I looked it up. The picaresque novel, Spanish picaresca from picaro. Oh, I always said picaro. Picaro, for rogue or rascal, is a genre of prose fiction. It depicts the adventures of a roguish but appealing hero, usually of low social class. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't
It kind
apply
of
so
does work,
much.
though. I feel like it kind of does.
Okay. Well, anyway, this is just scanning here. Spanish Golden Age. They trace it back to Petronius's Satyricon. That's certainly like a you've got two um, rogues basically wandering around um, during the Italy basically during the time of Rome's decadence.
Mm.
So yeah,
All right, let's take a break, listeners. We'll be back after this little jingle. And just a reminder that our episode is sponsored by Guinness. Appreciate the same great tasting Guinness at home thanks to our integrated draft system. Draft? A floating widget. Okay, I'm gonna go now.
it's your commercial. Don't ask me for advice.
I'm trying to read DRAUGHT, but that's draft, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay. Sorry, Mark. Give me.
that chair scrape was great.
All
That's
right, give me a
perfect
minute. Sorry,
audio
bud.
effect. All right.
Note, the widget may rattle in the can. Please do not shake before opening www.guinness.com.
And we're back.
So let's move on to the part of the show we like to call Mark Explains Big Words. Take it away, Mark.
Today's word, boys and girls, is quixotic. It is an adjective with an obvious derivation. Quixotic is an anglicized word derived from Quixote. So the definition given here is characterized by idealistic and impractical pursuits fueled by an unwavering commitment to noble yet unattainable goals. Derived, as I said, from the literary character Don Quixote, who famously embarked on idealistic adventures despite their impractical nature. I think that's pretty self explanatory.
I guess so. I mean, I did see like competing definitions. Um, how do you use this word?
All the time. I use it in this book that I mentioned.
Can you
Flansday
give like
and
an
its
example of how you might
sequel.
use it?
Well, I mean, the Aaron S. series of novelettes is about these two characters who go to Ireland for Bloomsday to celebrate their literary superhero, James Joyce. And then along the way, they celebrate other Irish authors too. In volume one, it's Flann O'Brien, hence Flansday. In volume two, it's Oscar Wilde, hence Wilde's Day. And the whole adventure is described as quixotic. In fact, I think that's in the blurb somewhere. Where is it? Yep, there it is. Flansday is the first novelette in the Aaronesque series by Mark Will and G.J. Villa. Here we meet Martin Wells and J.G. Vara on day one of their quixotic literary wank across Ireland. It's quixotic because Wells has all of these um, ideals about the trip, and he's the enthusiastic one, and then Vara is more of the Sancho character trying to bring Wells back down to earth, as it were, right? Like Wells is up in the clouds with all his highfalutin literary ideals, and um Vara is just like, we're on vacation, man. Let's just enjoy. But,
So, in a way,
Wells
it's
wants
like a
to.
role reversal from our Russia trip, right?
Is it?
Well, just that I could be the annoying idealist, and maybe you were more
I
wanting. I
thought
mean,
I thought I was. You're the one that was saying, "Why do you stop at every fucking historical monument?
yeah, and so
Why do you
that in
take
that
pictures? Why do you have to document everything?"
yeah,
So
that
I
aspect doesn't fit, but
yeah.
you know,
Well, I
fair
mean,
enough.
it's a this is a it's like Don Quixote is the first buddy film, right? Like you got two friends with different personality types. They love each other, but they also have their conflicts. And so when they travel together and they're on the road or whatever, there are a lot of interesting ways that
Right,
the
right.
narrative can be spun, you know?
Yeah, I guess maybe the slight difference or amendment would be that they have this squire master almost relationship, so they're not exactly equals,
Well,
right?
in just again to take it back to my own little project here with the Aaronesque series of
It's a
novelettes,
little brochure. It's a little flyer.
a paper.
It's a paper. Your little paper. Sorry.
Um, volume two of which is coming out soon, by the way. But um, what do I want to say? Yeah, I mean, like Vara, it's a running joke. Vara is like, "Oh, okay, I get it. I'm your squire. I'm your Sancho. So I guess I better fall into line." But
Mm,
he just like in we're going to talk about this later. There's role reversal in Don Quixote itself, so
mm.
that there's a similar dynamic in every iteration of this. I would say, like any kind of think of movies that have
Well, like Bill
have
and
that
Ted.
like 48 hours, okay, 48 hours, right? You got Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy's the prison inmate out for 48 hours to help the cop, but and so there's kind of a subservient or hierarchical role there, but during the course of their 48-hour adventure there's some role reversal, and you know the underdog becomes the overdog. Can we say that? You know what
The
I
super
mean?
dog.
Yeah, the super dog.
So even like I'm thinking of Fear and Loathing, right?
There's another example. Yeah,
What is the other? What are the characters called in that? Do you know?
the Hunter S. Thompson character is
Raoul
what
Duke and Dr.
Raul
Gonzo. Just looked it up.
Raul
Yeah,
Duke. Yeah.
yeah. So Dr. Gonzo is the squire, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Was that what you would suggest?
Is that the lawyer? The
Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah,
I
that
mean, he's
sounds
spoken
right.
quite. Raoul Duke speaks kind of like demeaningly of him. He kind of always like animalizes him, and just makes him seem very base at times.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
let's move
that's
on.
it. Yes.
All right. So one reading I want. Okay, we see an image here: Don Quixote versus the windmills. Most iconic episode in the story. Not even a part that was particularly interesting for me, to be honest. I do know that maybe if you were taking like a survey course, this is the part that your professor might get you to read. But
Tilting with windmills. That's the phrase. Like people who know nothing about the book can tell you that much, right?
yeah, okay. But I guess I would just say it's iconic because it shows the ridiculousness of the character and kind of the types of adventures he would embark on, right? The fact that you would, you know, charge at an inanimate object, um, that's obviously like beyond absurd. Um, I don't really know. What I do want to like introduce though is maybe like a more interesting thread is if we're gonna see Quixote as a heroic character, which this could very well be the crux of the rest of the show, is like how we see Quixote, whether, and I know, let's not just reduce it to a both end either. Like let's really like kind of maybe challenge both readings a little bit because I think that could be more interesting is to like yeah, to attack both positions. But in summation, one dominant reading of Quixote, and arguably the one that Cervantes very much champions, is that Quixote is a bit of a buffoon and that he is deluded by these chivalric notions and chivalric romances, and that we are meant to laugh at him um, because we're supposed to see how silly these books can be and how unsuitable they are at representing our reality. And they're almost like damaging to our critical faculty. And I would say that my buddy Carlos, who is Spanish, is very was a literature teacher, is a writer. He champions that position, right? So he's not comfortable with later attempts to romanticize Don Quixote as kind of like a champion of the imagination, as somebody who's trying to show us that despite the mundane reality that we live in, we can like kind of escape it by living in our dreams and imposing our own reality. So Carlos is not very sympathetic to that view. I am more so. Um, and that's like a pretty interesting tension in my opinion that I've like found a decent amount of criticism on that can like help us with our forthcoming discussion on this. But I'll let you jump in. But just the last thing I'll say is that in this kind of more celebratory vision of Quixote, he's also seen as battling with the plagues of modernity. And you could even argue that the windmills were like the technology.
Oh yeah,
Um,
he's kind of like a luddite.
exactly. And so here he is like kind of the Paul Bunyan character, like yeah, challenging modernity. So the windmill could be, yeah, a metaphor for for industrialization. But
Mm-hmm.
do you want to respond to any of my long rant, or do you want to just get into it a little bit later through the
Well, I
quotes
mean, I
that
think that I agree with what you said. There's an interesting tension there, and I could. I mean, I do kind of fall on the side of both, and
Sure,
not surprisingly,
sure.
I do think it can be both.
But even within the both and, maybe both and squared is like including a both and an attack on both. You know, like I kind of feel like both and shouldn't exclude the arguments against. So
Oh
maybe we
yeah.
can also like play with those a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on maybe now or on subsequent slides.
Well, let's keep moving, see what
Okay.
comes up.
Well, if we are gonna get into that, then we might as well just skip this. And it's just a
Sancho
funny.
whips himself.
Yeah, this is just a funny like side plot where, as I mentioned earlier, this Duke and Duchess who like fuck with Quixote for like a long part of section 2. Like a lot of it takes place at this Duke and Duchess's estate where they set up a bunch of like ridiculous trials for Don Quixote just for their own amusement. And in
Mm-hmm.
one of them they declare that they've heard it spoken from some kind of like mystical or magical creature that the only way that Dulcinea can be freed from this very mortal like peasant body into her like natural greatness is for Sancho to whip himself 3,000 times, which obviously he doesn't really take positively to. And in the picture that you see, he's like pretending to whip himself by like whipping this tree, and then he tells like Don Quixote, "Oh yeah, I just put in like 300 lashes."
Lashes, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny.
Okay, regarding how the great Sancho Panza took possession of his insula and the manner in which he began to govern.
Yeah, I guess again, so listener, if you want more of that really interesting and fruitful discussion that I've just teased you with, we'll come back to that in a couple minutes as we instead blindly follow the erratic nature of the order of my slides. So, really quick comment to make about this is that the running joke throughout the first part and then part of the second is that Sancho Panza is on this mission and he's sticking around because he has this idea that Quixote's put in his mind that he's going to eventually get an insula for being his sidekick. Like it'll be the reward at the end of the rainbow. And the Duke and Duchess kind of like oblige this dream so that he does kind of become a commander for a while of a community because the Duke is so powerful that he can kind of arrange this. And he does a really good job, but a lot of ridiculous things happen to him. Like he is given this dietitian doctor guy who never lets him eat really because he says it's like it's better to he can operate better on an empty stomach. So basically he gets sick of it, and there's an interesting reflection afterwards where Sancho no longer lusts for power because he kind of realizes that like he likes his life best.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Okay,
all I
what
have
are
to
we
say
looking
about
at
that.
here?
So this is like the penultimate part of the story. So Don Quixote loses a duel with someone from who's pretended to be a fellow knight, but is actually from Don Quixote's home village and is determined to kind of put an end to Don Quixote's fantasizing. So he defeats Don Quixote, although he loses once, which is kind of funny as well. But he ultimately defeats Don Quixote, and he doesn't kill him, obviously, because he's his friend, basically. But instead, he makes him promise to abandon the knighthood or that life for a year. And something that's really telling and amusing, if we're talking about Don Quixote's like tendency to romanticize absolutely everything in his life, is as he's returning to the village with Sancho, he suddenly says, "Okay, well, I have to be restricted to my community, so I know we can become shepherds." And but he does it, and again with he wants all the archetypes fulfilled. So they need to get their songs written. They need to get different names. They need to get different fantasy girls. So he's going to manage to do the exact same thing, but just under the auspices of like shepherd life.
Right,
And
right, right.
it's pretty funny, but again, it's for me, it's kind of cool because it's like again, I'm someone who makes lots of like weird like games and stuff for my life. Like I impose like lots of funny, arguably childish systems onto the way that I see things. And for me, it's like it's cool that he does this. It's like he's got an active imagination, and he's making his life more, yeah, more fun.
He's an enthusiast. I mean, when he decides to take something on, he goes 100%.
Yeah, and again, he's rejecting like this. You could say adulthood, but more like just the banality with which a lot of people are living their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. Okay, we're nearing the end.
Well, not of the episode. Don't get too
No.
excited. But we're nearing the end of Quixote's life, which is a very bizarre ending. It's like so. It feels like such a reversal. It's like, who's the guy who is it? Darwin, who allegedly, who like the Christians like to say, renounced everything at the end and said, "Oh, it was all lies and God is good." And I feel like there's some historical figure like that where there's this kind of myth that at the end he renounces all his stuff and becomes a very meek version of himself. Anyway, at the end, Don Quixote gets sick. You could say that it was coming and that he's like gradually been, his illusion hasn't been like fulfilling him enough, or it's been punctured too many times, and that so he returns to his former name, the Alonso Quijano. He apologizes for his past. He acknowledges that he was deluded, and he goes even further and just says that how toxic um, that genre is, and yeah, he's so contrite, he's embarrassed, and this just struck me as very strange. Like I don't like the ending. At the same time, like I want to like allow Cervantes to do his thing, like. But I also know that Cervantes was rushing the ending because he was dying, so I don't know if that may have played a role. And we knew the fact that Cervantes had to kill off the character, so that nobody else could use him. I don't know. So there's a lot going on here, but it's certainly a strange ending. It's like one of those unsatisfactory endings that, like, when you read a whole thing and then it's like, oh, but it was all a dream, which I always tell my students, please don't do that because it's so cheap. Do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts on that rant?
Um. Well, it's kind of like a Shaggy Dog story, right? Like it's just at the end, it's meaningless.
Right. I don't
I
know what
that
that
doesn't
means.
bother that doesn't bother me. I kind of like that. I mean, it's just like a pointless story. Like there's a big build up, and then it's just like, huh? It just ends, and it's like, what was that? So, I mean, you could read it a lot of different ways, I suppose. Maybe he was just rushed, and it's a slapdash ending, kind of tacked on, or maybe he intended it ironically, or both.
Or he is, he's doing what many critics of the day, will continue to say is Cervantes' main message. Like maybe I don't know, he obviously recognizes the charismatic power of Quixote and how lovable he is, but and maybe that even became bigger than what he originally intended. Like maybe he wanted it to be a farce, and then he kind of got stuck with this character that everybody loved.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't help but think, yeah, this guy also is really keen to make this point against chivalric romances, and yeah, so it's just a weird spanner. I'd like to read more criticism on it. I think if I was a Spanish person, I'm sure I would have a lot more to say, just because I'm sure they're steeped in that text. It's like been called the
Well,
Spanish Bible.
I mean, it's like Rimbaud renouncing poetry, and when he was questioned about his youthful masterpieces, he said, "I don't want to talk about that shit." You
Yeah,
know, I just want to make money and find a nice girl to marry. I mean, it's like he turned his back on everything he had stood for previously.
right,
So there's something similar at play here, I guess. I also think of like Walter White at the end of Breaking Bad. You know, it's like um, he knows that it was all for naught, but what an adventure he had, you know.
right.
And it's you're kind of ambivalent about it at the end, right? Like, what a wild ride he took us on, and yet it was also damaging in many ways, more so the Walter White character than Don Quixote, perhaps. But you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, sure.
there's negative fallout and uh, externalities, as they say.
Yeah, and I think the Nabokov quote that I sent you about the cruelty that exists in Don Quixote is maybe overlooked by readers who get caught up in the romantic sides of Quixote, like maybe there's a dark underbelly to his character, which in a more sober reading, like we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, this looks relevant. Can I read this one?
Please.
May God forgive you for the damage you've done to the whole rest of the world in trying to cure the wittiest lunatic ever seen. Don't you see, my dear sir, that whatever utility there might be in curing him, it could never match the pleasure he gives with his madness? Actually, that's not what I thought it was going to be. Um,
Yeah,
who is this?
this
Who is
is
this?
this is one of Don Quixote's friends speaking to the doctor
Mm-hmm.
at as he's nearing his end. And yeah, we see the kind of desperation with which his close compatriots react when they see him kind of losing his vigor, and Sancho's like trying to say, "Hey, let's go on another adventure. Like, I'm ready, and we'll talk about that as well soon." But if we see here that Cervantes is in a way is acknowledging all the good that Quixote provides
Yeah.
to the world and to the reader. So yeah, further kind of
It's just
complicating.
the first line. May God forgive you for the damage you've done. it's like when I first saw that, I thought someone was addressing
I see.
Quixote himself. You see
Right,
what I mean?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So moving on. Ah, yes, the Sanchification of Don Quixote and the Quixotization of Sancho.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
this
an
is what I was
interesting
talking about.
thread.
How the role reversal, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. And so another way to put this would be as Sancho's spirit ascends from reality to illusion, Don Quixote's declines from illusion to reality. And yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting trajectory that these characters take. It's almost like Quixote is like hooked him, right? He's like seduced Sancho into this way of seeing things. And while I don't know what would be the catalyst, you could say, for Quixote kind of losing that dream, but maybe it's just the repeated kind of failures that he's had in battles and so on. It's aging, um, or it's just a natural kind of waking up that he does, where the
Well,
dream
who
just doesn't
is this?
satisfy him
Some
anymore.
is this some critics' analysis? Like some.
It is, but it's like fairly widespread. It seems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's definitely widespread. Like it's definitely acknowledged that more and more towards the end, like Quixote's not seeing the his environment as like not everything's becoming animated or enchanted anymore. Like he'll go to an inn and it's just an inn at that point, whereas before it would have
Mm-hmm.
been a castle. So you do see kind of less and less delusion. But again, I'm not exactly sure why that would be, except for some of the
Well,
reasons
I
that I
mean,
speculated.
if we're talking about the influence of these two on one another, it's inevitable. Like when people are so intimately connected, they're going to influence one another. It's like the interplay
Sure.
of yang and yin, or Lennon and McCartney, right? John will sometimes write a Paul like song, and Paul will
Right.
sometimes write a John like song. It just happens. The closer people are, the more they come to resemble each other and take on each other's characteristics. Like they adapt different aspects of the other's personality and incorporate it into their own.
Absolutely. I guess I just never really, until now, maybe really gave Sancho that much credit. Like he could have that effect on Don Quixote because he's always kind of in this subservient role. But maybe, yeah,
Well, it's like that Hegelian dialectic, right? Like eventually the master becomes the slave of of his slave,
yeah,
just through the well, he would call it the dialectic, right? Like that it's just over time that's inevitable
yeah,
that the that
fair,
the there will be a kind of role reversal
right,
as those
yeah,
as those opposites interact. I mean, that's pretty basic principle of Taoism and
sure.
I guess Hegelianism. All right. So who is this? The Hillsdale Forum. What's this about?
Okay, this is just like some random person's blog, um, but it does kind of reveal this tension that I was talking about earlier. Although the fact that it is a random person's blog, I think, kind of does. It also shows how perhaps this is not a view that the Spanish critical consensus is comfortable with. But I'll just read it very quickly. I maintain that Don Quixote, despite the simplistic, humorous readings of him, contains the essence of resistance to a world that, as described by Kierkegaard, will come to an end to general applause from wits who believe it's a joke. I'm trying to understand what that means exactly. Will come to an end. Yeah, okay, okay. The Castilian's example is that of a superior mind that not only manages to dominate the body, but also succeeds in supplanting a negative reality with the reality of the buccaneer spirit that has characterized the protagonists of the most important feats in history. Um, and I
I
clipped a
like
couple.
I like Buccaneer spirit. That's an
Yeah,
interesting
I
phrase.
like it. And I like it with that extra part of supplanting a negative reality.
Hmm.
Um, but I think he goes on to like compare Don Quixote to like Napoleon and stuff. But you see that this article is a pretty severe misreading and misapplication of the book, which is pretty funny in some way. Yeah, so it just kind of gives you a little bit of background to what I was talking about earlier, and
Mm,
we'll get more if we want to keep going. But feel free to jump in at any time.
okay. The death of Don Quixote and the birth of modernity.
Uh, it just, I guess, Quixote is like considered the first novel. I don't really care about that kind of status stuff, and I find it. I don't feel comfortable weighing in on that discussion because I'm not sure myself like whether that is hugely significant. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Like from a historical perspective, maybe it is important. Maybe I should be giving it more credit. On the other hand, I'm just like I don't like when one work of art is suddenly placed on such a high pedestal, and it's like because like I think everybody's got their story to tell, and it's like when you individualize something and you're like denying the fact that everything's related, which I don't really like.
Well, as if it were all so clean. Like suddenly, modernity was born.
Yeah, exactly.
That's such an overgeneralization. So what is this person? So, I mean, who? What you're actually quoting from the work itself, right? What is this quote out of
Well, I kind
context
of like
now?
brought in
However,
something. Yeah, that's kind of separate. This quote is just kind of continuing that idea that I had in the windmills part, where
hmm,
Don Quixote is speaking about his reality, and he's saying like now sloth triumphs over diligence, idleness over work, vice over virtue. So it's interesting that you get these kind of social criticisms from Cervantes being spoken by a character that is allegedly also like his object of ridicule.
right.
So and you get all these kind of like longer soliloquies from Don Quixote where it seems to like make a lot of sense and the reader's nodding and you just don't know. It's either really messy from Cervantes, like oh well now I want to write some stuff about the reality around me. I don't. It's just there's a lot of layers.
Well, what do you mean it's messy? Like not intentional? Like he
Well,
just
I'm
got
not sure.
sloppy?
No, it's messy in the sense that like you wonder how much yeah maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not, you just don't know, but like it's messy in the sense that like Don Quixote, why if Don Quixote is meant to be pathetic, then why is he making so much sense?
Because that's what makes him an interesting character. The ambiguity, right? We feel this about Hamlet, Falstaff. Um, you know, any great character is going to have these shades of gray. It's not going to be like black and white all the time.
Yeah,
Wouldn't you
I'm
agree?
inclined to agree 100%, and that's
Yeah.
but I guess I just want to like we'll go to battle a little bit with Carlos then because yeah I don't know, I just think that yeah some people are not as willing to kind of elevate Don Quixote as a character, not as a great
Hmm.
work of art. They're not denying that. But they don't. And again, we'll get into it some more with further comments on this particular issue, which I kind of became obsessed with.
Okay. How about this one?
Um, I don't know if we want to read it, but it's just like it's Don Quixote commenting on the the gun basically, and how in his time suddenly the emergence of the gun was kind of a threat to the classic way of fighting, right? Because you couldn't battle mano a mano anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking of drones today and how we've like taken it to the next level.
Right.
Um, so if you are inclined to that reading where Don Quixote is the humanist fighting against modernity, you'd find good stuff in his words.
Well, it's like the Japanese samurai with his sword coming into conflict with, like, you know, artillery. Like, how can you compete with that?
Yeah.
But at the same time, that their perspective would be like, these guys with their fucking guns are cowards, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, fight me basically mano a mano, sword to sword, right?
Right.
Let's duel as two individuals. You're like taking the human element out of battle and conflict, right? You're just reducing it to machinery, and of course it's escalated even further today. I just read a book about the Japanese biological warfare experiments of World War II, the shit they did in Manchuria. Of course, all of that research was collected by the U.S. and taken to Fort Detrick, and so you know, COVID is a direct result of all that. But that was the philosophy. Oh, we can kill more people by manufacturing these viruses, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like poisoning the water of our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot uh more lethal than even bombs.
You
So
can
they
blow up
thought.
pagers.
It didn't really work out the way they wanted. Yeah, there you go. Blow up pagers and walkie talkies like real men. That's what real men do.
Yeah.
Oh, ha ha ha! They blew off his balls.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting for sure. And it
Yep.
is interesting if we're talking about how prescient this novel is. I mean, if you look at those last lines, he's talking about a stray shot is fired into the courage and spirit that inflame and animate a brave heart, sent by one who perhaps fled in fear at the bright flare when the damned machine discharged it, and it cuts off and ends in an instant the thoughts and life of one who deserved to enjoy many more long years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, here we go again. Technology renders the soldier an object of war rather than a subject of war, an instrument of the mechanical arm he wields rather than an arm wielding an instrument. Yeah, that's the same theme. It's that
Right.
Luddite kind of diatribe.
Mm-hmm.
Although this looks like a critical comment
I think
rather
it is.
than
I was going to
the
say the
quote from the
panel.
text. But
Right.
yeah, I mean it's still on point.
Sure.
Okay. Oh my goodness, you're quoting communist literary theorists. So
Do you want to just read a tiny bit of this, and you can stop at any point if you feel like it gets dry, but maybe it's just maybe interesting.
okay, this is from Lukács. Um, it is not a coincidence that Don Quixote was always a favorite book of the most progressive people. In Marx's eyes, Cervantes and Balzac represented the peaks of novel writing, and when once Comrade Dimitrov delivered a lecture on literary policy to the anti-fascist writers in Moscow, he said, "Write against German fascism a satire like Don Quixote." Hmm.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So,
How would it be? How would it be anti-fascist? I mean, how is it progressive? or
Well,
I don't know, socialist maybe. Long pause.
yeah. Well, again, this is more of the critical reading of Quixote as it says. Don Quixote demonstrates the destructive effects of these novels. So, and Carlos would, I think, echo the fact that at its heart, Don Quixote is like a work of criticism, critical of the society that he's
Mm-hmm.
living in. You know, it's a very sober book that's encouraging us to be very critical and not romantic. Um, and so I guess in that sense, if you were criticizing like German fascism, it'd be like this guy's giving you guys all these ridiculous ideas of Aryan race and so on, and
Mm.
you know, but we need to cut through all that pomp and circumstance. So yeah, we can keep going.
Well, I guess when you take anything too seriously, it becomes perverted, as it says here, right? Like the um, everything becomes perverted. The sublime becomes ridiculous. Goodwill is turned into injury, and noble conceptions into mere silliness.
Yeah,
That's the danger of
right.
uh, of buying too much into anything, really, any kind of ism or ideology. So this is Lukács again. It is certain that the romances of chivalry misled many of their readers, alienated them from reality. Alienation is a very Marxist concept, but with the ingenuousness of a poet, el ingenioso, Cervantes goes far beyond that. He invents a man who applies the morality of the romances of chivalry to reality, who wants to realize in everyday life the stilted medieval way of life, the customs and behavior of these romances. Okay, what about it? Why did you pick this quote?
Well, again, because I guess this is backing that argument that it's better to see Quixote as a fool.
Okay.
Yeah, and like how might someone might come to that conclusion? And again, I think that in that time, if we were living in that time, we might be seeing that more because we might have a certain frustration towards those chivalric notions, for example. Maybe if especially maybe if they were applied by the state, for example. So maybe focusing more on the satirical elements would have been more of like a palate cleanser for us. So you know, something that was like, yes, let's let's laugh at this guy for if that was an actual issue. Whereas maybe in our time, we're kind of, you know, how we got the kind of consistent paradigmatic shifts in life and literature and the yin yang. So maybe in our time, we need more of the opposite. You know, it could be that that's why I'm kind of arguing for a more romantic reading because maybe that's what we need in our routine life or the life that's just maybe losing some of the romance of the past. But I don't want to go too far down that. And I also see you fading a little bit, brother. So
Well, no, I'm just thinking about how our perception of cultural icons or political figures or celebrities um, change over time, right? Like, and I
absolutely,
am I am fading, by the way. Yes, you're right, but I'm also reflecting. So
okay,
like the goat of yesteryear is the hero of today. I don't mean
yeah,
goat
right,
in the sense of greatest of all time, but like the loser, the fool, suddenly becomes like, the most celebrated, the most despised. I mean, Trump is a figure like that in a way, right? Like he was loved at one time by even the people who now hate him. Like they all wanted him on their fucking talk show. They all thought he was a great interview, and then suddenly he became Hitler.
Right.
So it's like
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
projected whatever onto
Sure.
him. Maybe that's not the best example, but like anyone in the public eye undergoes those vicissitudes, I guess,
Absolutely.
those changing perceptions.
That's a nice
So,
word.
so yeah, so you know, Quixote, Quixote would be no different. Hamlet would be no different. Is Hamlet a fool or a a hero?
Right.
Is he? I think Nietzsche referred to one aspect of his personality as Jack the Dreamer, like contemptuously, you know. Or
Well,
is
here's
he
one
like,
more like interesting
mm-hmm,
thread that I think like again, if we were Spanish, we might be more aligned with Carlos because it seems that when Don Quixote like established its place this in the literary canon and kind of became synonymous with Spain for us, and then Spain like had to use it as like this is Spanish identity, this is what we're proud of, this is what we produced. And so then you see in a way them okay, they're okay with this more like, there's a cool word I wanted to use, but anyway, glorification of there's a better word I wanted, something with the like idea of like bear.
deification almost?
Yeah, deification, but there was even a cooler word like a bear, something with the word bear. But anyway,
Bear?
so yeah, I feel like there's something with like anyways, um yeah, so then you start to become suspicious that this is actually like a nationalistic push, to make Quixote not a fool but like a hero. And then you could see why Carlos, maybe being critical of his own nation's penchant for nationalism, would be like, no, like you're misreading this. So I don't know. There's a lot again to unpack there.
Well, yeah. Or even take a figure like Christ, This is a guy who was despised and like executed by the Roman Empire, basically, And then he becomes over time like a Messiah character, a savior, a
Right.
world savior, and then he becomes incorporated into like state propaganda, and now he's
Mm.
like the fucking border patrol, uh, you know, guy on the border with his fucking AR-15.
Right. And the fundamentalists are all pro-Israel, against the little man. So you even
Yeah,
see that, you see it going to that extent where it's
yeah,
like
sure,
the punisher of the poor.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
All right. This is an AI generated picture of Carlos. I don't know if you'll appreciate us putting it on, but I think it's pretty funny. So, Don Carlos de la Plana, and we'll just briefly, I think, get a little bit more into detail by directly quoting from Carlos, and then I think we're going to wrap up the show because I got to go and watch Arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we can just pick out a couple of choice bits. I think I may have quoted a bit too much of him, so let's just see if we can keep going.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll read a little bit and then you can jump in. So, in Don Quixote, Cervantes uses the most popular narrative genres of his time. Apart from the aforementioned genre of chivalry, the Moorish novel, the Byzantine novel, the pastoral novel, And what Cervantes does with these stories is to use only their codes and interpret them in the material reality of his time. The result of this is ridiculous, which shows his critical sense and his fierce rationalism against implausible and non operational stories in the reality of his time. There's nothing more pathetic than hearing Sancho speak as if he were a great philosopher. We can go to the next slide.
Looks like something got cut off.
Yeah, maybe. And kind of when I challenged him, because we were basically having an argument about, whether Don Quixote or the novel is more romantic or more rational. He says, as I told you the other day, Tom, when I talk about rationalism, I'm talking about criticism and dialectics, about decoding reality, highlighting its defects and virtues. Cervantine, rationalism is not incompatible with imagination, creative capacity, and so on. Can he who thinks irrationally criticize and understand? Can we think irrationally? So, yeah, he just wants us to remember maybe. I think the word I wanted before was lionize, by the way.
Okay.
It wasn't bear, but
not bear.
It's because I'm in Russia, bro. But yeah, I think Carlos might argue that if we're seeing Quixote as romantic, in a way, we are reducing Cervantes, where like Cervantes is intensely critical. And I would say like a lot of the greatest writers, yeah, they have that kind of desire to be very like basically critical, right? Like critical is like a quality that I would see as the most closely aligned with what it means to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And that criticism may lead you to places of imagination and fantasy, but ultimately it's like a place of criticism. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just a random thought, but should we leave it there and maybe even though we can skip the next sections? I think I've done justice basically to Carlos's position. We will maybe you can even post this PowerPoint if people want to dig into it a little bit more. They can get the slides, but I kind of have to go. We can maybe jump into the next text, for example.
Yeah, we're skipping quite a bit.
I think that's okay, bro. Just, yeah, thanks to Don Carlos. Thanks to my wife, Liliana, whose acronym became Liliana, well, not acronym, but alias became Liliana de Siberia for my summer travel log. And she listened to the whole Don Quixote audiobook, which was quite interesting way to experience it
in
in Russian.
Russian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've included a couple of images I sent you. This is DQ country, and then the Dairy Queen logo. I just thought that was an interesting intertextual coincidence. So this has
For
been
sure.
DQ country. Maybe that's the title of this episode. But
Yeah.
the next text will be at some point. Yeah, get ready for it. Apparently,
I'm excited because it affects my life. It's important.
Okay, well, apparently, without the participation of our friend Steve Wasserman, we're gonna do something with Fernando Pessoa's Book of Disquiet.
Okay,
So
nice.
I'll pick some fragments, and we will discuss that very fragmentary work. And even though Mr. Wasserman won't be joining us on the broadcast, I guess.
I'm sure
He
he'd love to contribute some audio.
Well, he already has, and I've
Sure.
already kept it, and we'll chop it up and use it because it's quite good. I really like his insights, and
Sure.
he relates Pessoa's text to both Morrissey and the I Ching, so it's interesting. As always, don't forget to subscribe, I'm at markwillwright, WRITE.substack.com. And my co-host is at tomekb.substack.com. This will be on YouTube at some point at markwillwright, WRITE.
And Mark,
Thanks
when are you
again.
dropping that Dylan Desire? When is that going to come out on YouTube?
I just realized I need to edit one other little bit of that, so hopefully
Okay.
tomorrow. But
Awesome.
I've been saying that for over a week, so we'll see.
I'll love you tomorrow.
All right.
It's only a day
Thanks,
away.
everybody. This has been
Thank you,
season
everybody.
3, episode 16.
Dos
This is
vidania.
DQ Country. Farewell.